Peter, what did you think about this myth-busting website brought to us by the UN?
It was great. They hit on the main ones, and the science they presented was very understandable. So that's good.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and I'm your host as we discuss climate mythbusters. Who are you going to call? Well, I don't know. Maybe the scientists, certainly not the climate deniers. Where are they going to be when these myths are like finally so busted that we have to completely admit that the scientists were right? I'm going to address some of these, and then we're going to hear what myths Peter wants to discuss, and then we're going to hear Paul discussing some of these myths and how they have been and continue to be busted by the facts. Now, one of the things that I want to discuss is that we got these mythbusters from the UN's very own site. The page is called Mythbusters. Listen, it's really, really interesting. We're going to share the link in the description, and I definitely recommend that you check it out. I loved this report. I loved that it was so thorough. If you still have doubts, which I hope you don't, but hey, listen, no judgment. But if you do, it's good to look at this and see how they can help assuage those doubts that climate change is happening as the scientists say it's happening. What I also like is there are little videos within this article, and there are also PDFs that you can click on that give you a more depth look at each specific myth. And you can just learn so much. I found myself really, really into this report. But one of the things that I find so interesting, this is a phrase that happens so much. You go to these climate conferences and people still talk about when climate will change. But listen, this is a myth. Yes, okay, we know climate's going to change, of course, but climate change has already happened. It has been happening. It's not the future. Let's stop talking about the future. Climate change is happening now. It's already affecting every region on this entire planet. It's not affecting everyone the same way, but we are having changes in rainfall patterns. We are experiencing rising sea levels, melting glaciers, a warming ocean, which, by the way, there was an article in the Times today discussing how incredibly warm, frighteningly warm our oceans have gotten, and more intense weather events, whether they're cold weather events or hot weather events. So it is happening now. Whether it's affecting you on a grand level really depends on where you live and your economic status. If you're a subsistence farmer and you need consistent rainfall to grow your crops and you live in the Northern Triangle, you've been feeling climate change for many, many years. If you live, I don't know, where I do, in the East Coast of the United States, and you have any long-term memory, it's April now as we're recording this. I remember as a young teenager going to the Easter parade, and different times back then, people would bundle up in their fur still, and there would be a bit of snow falling. Now, it's April, as I mentioned, and it was 75 degrees yesterday here in New York City. No amount of snowfall for the Easter parade. So it's happening now. Of course, it doesn't affect people's lives, but that's only a matter of time. The other thing that I think is so important, and we've discussed this on this channel ad infinitum, is that not only is there climate change, not only is it happening now and has been happening, but it's not just something that occurs. Climate is always changing, and that's how it does it. Well, guess what? It does, but not at the rapid pace that we see now. Yes, it's been changing, but in the last 200 years, weather has changed and warming has been so accelerated like nothing we've ever seen before. Prior to this, we have seen weather changes. For example, if a giant volcano erupted, emitting many, many particles in the atmosphere, we would see some cooling, perhaps for an inordinate amount of time. None of these Major events have happened in the last 200 years to account for the rapid warming. What we can use to account for this is the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas. This emits carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. And we know that an atmosphere that has a greater amount of carbon dioxide is also going to be a lot warmer. We saw this from the time of the dinosaurs. There are paleoclimatologists who study ancient matter. For example, the organic matter found in permafrost from many, many millions of years ago, that they can read the amount of carbon dioxide that was present at that time. And it tells us a great deal about the atmosphere during that time and how it's different during our time. So we have just pumped a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and this we can correlate absolutely with the warming of our planet. Now, I am going to turn it over to Peter because I know that he has a lot to say, especially about fossil fuels and carbon dioxide. Peter, what did you think about this myth-busting website brought to us by the UN?
It was great. They hit on the main ones, and the science they presented was very understandable. So that's good. So presenting just the basic, fundamental, unarguable science of the greenhouse gases demolishes all of these very clever nowadays climate deniers. And they're as active as ever, probably more active. And some of their, actually, many of their malevolent ideas that get into the internet, of course, is really quite clever nowadays. And so it's even more damaging. Well, they have a new movie out, definitely worth watching. Shows you how ingenious they are, but it also shows that later on in the movie, it's very clear these people are conspiracy theorists. It's quite fascinating to watch it. So I wasn't aware of that before I watched the movie. But I learned things from the movie. Patrick Moore says, "Don't worry about global warming. We are still in an ice age." He repeated that over and over. Patrick Moore is where I live, our British Columbia climate change denier. Willie Soon is still saying it's all the sun. So don't worry about global warming, it's all the sun. And he's still getting published, by the way. He got published recently, and a couple of other scientists, because Willie Soon is a bona fide scientist. They published that it was all due to the sun as well. I used to tell the Naiads, well, if it is all due to the sun, I'm really, really way worried because there's not a damn thing we can do about it. We can do something about the truth of climate change because we can stop burning fossil fuels. I'm going to hit on what I see as actually the most dangerous myths going around now today. And unfortunately, they come from the scientists. The biggest climate change myth of all time is that 1.5 degrees C is still alive, that we can still limit to 1.5 degrees C. I mean, I've been saying for quite a long time how absurd it is. I mean, it's beyond absurdity now. And it is a lie, right? Yes, the climate skeptic deniers are lying, but now we have our scientists lying. It's very hard to find a reason for this claim that they're hanging on to, that they're sticking to. As has always been the case, there's only James Hansen out there who is explaining to people, no, 1.5C is long dead, and it is long dead. And that's totally provable by the atmospheric CO2 equivalents and by the radiative forcing. And one thing which hasn't got much publicity from Hansen's paper, and it was great paper because he busted the myths of the other scientists. And the myths of the other scientists are also very attractive. I mean, it's nice to think we can still limit to 1.5. It's nice to think that global warming is not accelerating, but they're wrong. And it's very, very, very tragic. The acceleration has finally been acknowledged by a couple of climate experts, and good for them. It took them 10 years to come around and see that global warming is accelerating. And Gavin Schmidt, who is the head of NASA GISS, he explained it, and he did modeling and diagrams, but it's not out there. So we don't have scientists agreeing with James Hansen and pointing out to the public that we are beyond emergency, way beyond emergency. The other myth from the scientists, I've done two of them. Okay. There's two more. The 1.5 myth from scientists is that it's not 1.5 until it's been 1.5 for 10 or 12 years. That's absolutely ridiculous. We have all these drivers of global warming accelerating as well. And I'm just doing a video again on that. I did that several years ago. So 20 years is for confirming a past trend. 20 years is not to delay more action on global warming. The action can't be delayed. As I'm saying over and over, it comes from the IPCC, repeated every year by the IPCC chairs, that emissions have to be put into immediate decline. And otherwise, we are done for, right? There's no world beyond 2C, although the researchers think there is. There isn't. It used to be years ago kind of amusing, the denial, but it ain't anymore.
Thank you so much, Peter. I mean, none of it's amusing, right? We can, I don't even think the gallows humor fits. It just isn't part of the scenario and the situation that we find ourselves in. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. And of course, we appreciate your views on the scientists, and so many people do feel let down. So thank you so much for bringing that to light. And Paul, speaking of science and scientists, can you fill us in a little bit more in that regard?
Yes, thank you, Regina, and thank you very much, Peter. The report is excellent. I think we all have a cranky uncle or a family member who, we get together for Christmas or Easter or whatever, and they go on and on about climate denial. We all have that type of person in our family, and we don't choose our family members, right? We have to see them occasionally. So this report is an excellent way to inoculate people on some of these climate myths, right? And there's many climate myths from all different sources. Peter mentioned a few, but I think the PR, the public relations people at the fossil fuel companies have put, millions upon millions of dollars to come up with some really good talking points to try to make people question climate change. And it's following along the playbooks of the denial for the cigarette industry. Now, many of us in North America had the opportunity to see the totality of a recent solar eclipse. And I was thinking, well, this should really be the final nail in the coffin to the flat earthers. I guess not, because, flat earthers, I mean, every day the sun rises and sets, and there's things that happen every day, every hour, that seem to invalidate what they're saying. And I find it hard to believe that they actually believe what they're saying in that case. But climate deniers, a lot of them really believe what they're saying. Not all of them, because they get good funding from the fossil fuel company, et cetera, to say mistruths. And once you say mistruths, it just sort of cascades, and you kind of you fall into a pattern of doing that. So the idea of a cranky uncle in your family is an idea that John Cook often talks about. In fact, there's a cartoon book about your cranky uncle, and he talks about how you can inoculate people so that they don't fall for denial talking points and tactics. And this UN report, the UN Mythbuster report, is an excellent read. It's an excellent report. It's not too long, but it's got all of these key points, which anybody sitting on the fence should realize that yes, climate change is here. It's an issue. It's affecting people every day, and we need to phase out fossil fuels and really ramp up renewable energy economy. So a number of the points were, natural gas is a fossil fuel. It's not a clean source of energy. I mean, natural gas was touted as a bridge fuel. It was touted as being clean by, of course, the fossil fuel industry, and that's simply not the case. The renewable energies and solar PV, wind power, geothermal, hydroelectricity, all of these things are getting better and better and better. In fact, they're referred to as positive tipping points. They're social tipping points that can actually take off at much faster than we expect and put a real dent in the fossil fuel emissions and sort of try to bring us back to some sort of path of stability. But, is it too late? You hear that term a lot. Well, it's not too late now, but it's too late tomorrow. I like that sort of phrase. There is a sense of emergency and urgency. Many countries have declared fossil fuel emergencies. But, there are entire countries now today that rely 100% on renewable energies. And a couple are Costa Rica, Norway, Iceland, Paraguay, and Uruguay. There are large regions in some countries like South Australia, Quebec in Canada, and Scotland, many places where there's actually 100% of power can be handled by renewables. And in fact, there's power exported because the renewables are generating more power than their demand. And some projections by 2030, the transition to clean energy will create literally millions of jobs. So fossil fuel industry stands to lose about 5 million jobs by 2030. And the renewable energy stands to gain 14 million jobs by 2030. So a net gain of 9 million jobs. If you just look at some of the stats, say on electric cars, for example, the International Energy Agency had their Global Energy Outlook 2023 summary. In 2020, only 4% of new cars on the roads around the world were electric. That's, 1 in 25 cars. By 2023, just a few years later, that number is 1 in 5 cars, or 20%. In places like China, it's much, much higher. So, we can rapidly transition our economy. We just need to change our mindset. So this report is excellent for literally destroying climate myths and untruths in a very readable fashion. So it's a great report for your cranky uncle.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. I like the cranky uncle effect. Actually, it really helps to emotionally stabilize me, because I tend to be a little bit more compassionate towards those to whom I'm related. Now, this may or may not be rational, but it is true. So when I hear someone saying that climate change is a hoax, or it isn't real, or climate always change, I can just put that little cranky uncle or cranky aunt there, and it helps me to speak to them as if they're a human, So I think that is really beneficial. One of the things that I think is really important about the myth busting thing is it really arms us. It gives us a way to understand, not just to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and what's causing it, but as you mentioned, to reach out to people and to explain where they're mistaken in a very logical way. Because I think that when it becomes fraught with emotion, something that I see so much these days, oh, you're so stupid, or you're uneducated, you don't know the science, everyone has an answer for everything. But when we take it away from this kind of childish name calling that gets us nowhere, and explain, hey, you say that combating climate change is too expensive. Well, guess what? We brought a man to the moon, and that created a lot of jobs. And we can build mass transit rather than highways that just serve cars. There are so many things that we can do, and so many amazing and exciting jobs that can be generated when we make this move away from fossil fuels. We're just too stuck in this idea that this is how it's always been done, and therefore it has to be this way, and there's no alternative. That is absolutely not the case. This mind that we've been given, or that this mind that has evolved, is capable of tremendous things, and we need to harness the power of the mind to take us out of the cesspit that we're kind of all in these days and move to a higher realm of discussion and possibilities. That's kind of how I see it. And I just wonder, Peter, what you think about the idea that there can be another way, a way of possibility that's very positive.
Yeah, I've been saying for many, many years that the world is making a choice between the best of all possible futures, an absolute golden age for humanity, with clean, safe, renewable, that means everlasting energy, I mean, the prospects are mind-blowing. But we're choosing between that future, best future, and the worst possible future. And very clearly now, with the sort of help and pushing of nearly everybody, we are headed for a dark, dark age, and that will not end either. The other point I want to pick up on you that you just made is yes, we're not just looking at the collapse of civilization. We're not just looking at the collapse of the human population. We are looking at the collapse of all life on planet Earth because the IPCC said in 2014, for example, that under every scenario, even the best scenarios, there will be a major increase in the rate of species extinction, right? Here I am in Victoria. We don't see many birds anymore, right? And the science is confirming that. Our birds worldwide are in free fall. Insects, it's well known, right, that we have an insect apocalypse. I think that's a very fair term. So yeah, we're looking at the world, and that is why I am totally with Mary Robinson, who is the lone person, I guess, apart from myself, who several years ago at a lecture said that denial of climate change is evil. Yes, it is, by definition, right? If you are even putting at risk billions of people, and inevitably we're going to lose more species faster. Lastly, I just want to congratulate James Hansen again for his and his colleagues for that great paper, because without that paper, the current acceleration apparently would never have come to light. Why is that important? It changes everything. The current acceleration of climate change changes everything. There is no more carbon budget. There is no more time. And it totally confirms what the IPCC says, but nobody else is saying, that emissions have to be put into decline immediately and very, very fast. It is a survival issue. It has been for a long time, but now we know there is actually an increase in global warming acceleration. It is definitely a survival issue. And thank you for the IPCC for reminding us that in a very reasonable way by that statement. We have a narrow closing window to secure a livable future for all the children today, future generations, all life on this planet. We should be working to bring life back on the planet, and some people are, and I think that's wonderful.
We definitely should be working to bring life on planet. This is not meant to be a dead planet. I'm convinced of it. We are not the moon. We are not Pluto. Not saying that those aren't wonderful planets, but this planet happens to be one that has a capability to sustain life. How is it that one measly species can evolve on this planet and determine the entire planet's future and every living being on it? I don't want that legacy. Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Martians are rolling their eyes at your last comment, saying, we're here on Mars. But anyway, that's gallows humor. I'm sorry. Going back to the renewable, the remarkable acceleration of renewables, alternate energies to fossil fuels. Even the International Energy Agency, which has for many years been the sort of the mouthpiece of the fossil fuel industry, their latest report, they show trajectories for coal reduction, oil reduction, and natural gas reduction. They have all of those three things peaking before 2030 and, starting to drop. The drop isn't steep enough, but there's a turning point, it seems, in the fossil fuel industry. And part of that huge change is China. Growth in China is going to be much more stabilized than it's been, on a tear for decades. China recognizes that can't be continuing, and they're the house for many of the production of the solar photovoltaic and the electric cars and so on. So they're really expanding, and that industry is growing much faster. You know, the renewables is growing much faster than anyone could have imagined even a few years ago. There's a great paper from University of Exeter on tipping points, and it talks a lot about positive tipping points are things. So let me just explain. I mean, we talk about feedbacks often, you know, feedback loops, where a positive feedback loop is a reinforcing feedback loop, and it makes the problem worse. A negative feedback loop is a slowing or breaking feedback. And that term is very confusing because the positive one is bad, the negative one is good. And there's a lot more positive feedbacks in the system, accelerating feedbacks. So this report on global tipping points really talks about positive tipping points and negative tipping points, whereas positive tipping points are, you know, policies in place to slash fossil fuels, acceleration of battery technology, acceleration of all of the different types of renewables, you know, acceleration of people's mindset that we're in a lot of trouble and we need to change the way we do things. So, you know, I gave the example of the number of electric cars. I gave the example of the number of jobs expected. So it seems that we might be at sort of a turning point. You know, it needs to be much faster. You know, there needs to be a phasing out of fossil fuels, not just a peak and then a slow drop, but, you know, a greatly accelerated phase out. I mean, we have a lot of products that are made from petrochemicals. You know, there's a lot of materials, plastics, asphalt, things made of petroleum-derived products. And we actually have alternatives for most of these things already today. It's just a matter of scaling up the alternatives and, you know, having the willpower and the political emphasis to do these sort of things. So we have to keep trying. I mean, we can't just throw up our hands and say, oh, we can't do anything. That's absurd. We can't, you know, that's not in human nature to do that anyway. So change is all around us. Change is happening faster. It's affecting people's mental health, affecting people's ability to get insurance for their houses, and it's affecting all aspects of life: emotional, spiritual, physical, mental health. You know, one of the biggest growth areas, if you're wondering about a career in the future, is counseling, because it's going to be a huge growth area as climate disruption gets worse and worse. So thanks, Peter, and thanks, Regina, for this great discussion.
Yeah, Paul, thank you for bringing up the whole idea of counseling being a good field to get into. And matter of fact, it is. I mean, there's so many different realms within counseling, and a lot of counseling programs. I won't say a lot, but there are counseling programs that are specializing specifically in, and we've done a program on this, on solastalgia. It's pronounced differently by different people. I like to say solastalgia. And we'll put a link in the description to that episode if you're interested in climate grief. So please check that out. It's a very, very interesting thing. It's a very real phenomenon. And it's important to know that climate grief is real and people are going to need help. And it's not just for the existential grief that it brings about, but also the real world impacts after major weather effects. People also will need counseling for that. And sadly enough, for the very, very bad impacts, you know, many people may suffer PTSD. So, you know, this is not a joke. We really need to approach climate change from all aspects of humanity. And again, I just wanted to say that the transition to clean energy is not going to bankrupt us. What will bankrupt us is spiritual vacuity and climate change. We can fund the transition, we can train people, and we can flourish in a totally new way of life. And I welcome you to join us in that mindset. And I really welcome you to please check out this site that we have been describing to you. It's so interesting. And one thing I definitely want you to do is to subscribe. Our subscriber list is growing, and we just love to have more of you along, sharing this journey with us. Like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. What are your favorite myths that you know need to be busted? Let us know, and maybe we'll do a show on it in the future. And we look forward to seeing you next time at the Climate Emergency Forum.